If I asked you to picture Rumi, you'd probably imagine a calm, spiritual poet writing beautiful lines about love. That's usually how people think of him today. Soft voice, deep quotes, something you see shared online when someone is going through a breakup. But if you met him in his early 30s, that's not what you would have seen at all. He was not known as a poet. He was known as a serious religious scholar, the kind of person people respected, maybe even felt a little intimidated by. He taught Islamic law. He gave lectures. He had students who followed him closely. He lived a structured and respected life. Rumi was born in the year 1207 in a city called Balkh, which is in modern-day Afghanistan. At that time, the region was part of a large Persian cultural world. His full name was Jalal al-Din Muhammad, and the name Rumi came later, after he settled in a different land. His father was a well-known religious scholar, so from the beginning, Rumi grew up in an environment filled with books, deep conversations, and formal study. Religion was not something casual in his house. It was serious work. His father wrote, taught, and debated ideas about faith and law. That shaped Rumi from an early age. As a child, he studied hard. He memorized the Quran. He learned Arabic and Persian. He studied theology and legal reasoning. This was advanced education for that time. He wasn't just learning basic religion. He was being trained to carry on a legacy. But his childhood was also marked by instability. When he was still young, the Mongol invasions began spreading across Central Asia. Cities were attacked. Entire communities were destroyed. Families had to leave everything behind to survive. Rumi's family decided to leave Balkh before the violence reached them fully. They traveled for years. Imagine growing up on the road, moving from place to place, never quite settled. They passed through different regions, including parts of Persia and Iraq. Eventually, they settled in Konya, which is in modern-day Turkey. That long journey mattered. When you later read Rumi's poetry, he talks often about longing and separation. He writes about feeling far from something important and searching for a reunion. It's hard not to connect that with his early life as a child who had to leave home and wander across unfamiliar lands. By the time he reached his 20s, he was already respected for his knowledge. When his father passed away, Rumi stepped into his position as a teacher. He continued the work. He gave public lessons. He explained religious law. He guided students in theology. People came to him for answers. He had authority. He had structure. He had a clear identity. He also had a normal life outside of teaching. He married. He had children. He was not isolated from society. He was fully part of it. From the outside, his life looked stable and complete. He had a reputation, family, and influence. Nothing about his life at that stage suggested he was about to become one of the most quoted poets in the world. If you paused his story right there, you would assume he would grow older as a respected scholar, maybe write a few religious texts, and be remembered locally. But something unexpected was about to happen. And it wasn't a war. It wasn't a political event. It wasn't even a career decision. It was a meeting with one person. That meeting would change not just his life, but the direction of his entire legacy. So, around the age of 37, something happened that completely shifted Rumi's life. A man named Shams of Tabriz arrived in Konya. Shams was not like the scholars Rumi usually spent time with. He wasn't polished. He didn't care much about reputation or fitting into social expectations. He had been traveling for years, searching for someone he felt could understand him deeply. He wasn't looking for fame or students. He was looking for a connection. When Shams met Rumi, something clicked between them. There are different stories about their first conversation. Some say Shams asked Rumi a question that challenged everything he thought he knew about spirituality. Others say they simply began talking and continued for hours without stopping. The exact details are unclear, but what is clear is that Rumi was deeply affected. Before Shams, Rumi's life was structured around teaching religious law and guiding students in formal study. After meeting Shams, his focus shifted toward a more personal, emotional experience of faith. He became less concerned with intellectual debate and more interested in inner transformation. He began spending long periods of time with Shams, often in private discussion. They would talk about God, love, the ego, and the deeper meaning of existence. For Rumi, this was not just an interesting friendship. It felt like awakening. It was as if something inside him that had been quiet for years suddenly became alive. But not everyone around him was happy about this change. His students felt neglected. They had once been the center of his attention, and now this mysterious traveler seemed to have taken their teacher away. Some of them felt confused. Others felt jealous. They didn't understand why Rumi, who had always been composed and disciplined, now seemed so absorbed in this new relationship. Over time, tension grew, and then one day, Shams disappeared. What exactly happened is still debated. Some historians believe he was killed by individuals who resented his influence over Rumi. Others think he may have left on his own. There is no clear record that gives us a final answer. What we do know is that Rumi was devastated. He searched for Shams. He sent people to look for him. He hoped he would return. When it became clear that Shams was not coming back, something changed inside him again. This time, the change came through grief. Instead of returning to his old life as if nothing had happened, Rumi began expressing his pain through poetry. He didn't sit alone quietly writing in the way modern poets might. He spoke his verses out loud. His students wrote them down as he recited them. The love he felt for Shams and the pain of losing him became the foundation of his most powerful work. He created a large collection of poems known as the Divan of Shams of Tabriz. Naming the collection after Shams shows how central that relationship was to his transformation. The poetry speaks about longing, union, separation, and the search for something beyond ordinary experience. When people read Rumi today and feel understood during moments of heartbreak or confusion, they are often connecting to the emotional depth that came from this period of loss. It's interesting to think about how different his legacy might have been if he had never met Shams. Without that friendship, he might have remained a respected scholar known mainly within his region. Instead, that relationship opened a door that changed his voice and shaped his place in history. And the transformation was not temporary. It continued for the rest of his life. After Shams disappeared, Rumi did not go back to being the same teacher he used to be. The shift inside him was permanent. His teaching style changed. Instead of focusing mainly on legal details and structured lessons, he began speaking more about inner experience. He talked about love, but not in the romantic way most people think of today. When he said love, he meant something much bigger. He meant the force that pulls a person out of ego and into something deeper. A lot of his poetry circles around this idea that the ego has to break before a person can truly grow. He believed that pain was not meaningless. He saw it as a doorway. In many of his poems, he suggests that what feels like loss can actually be transformation. One of his most famous ideas is that the wound is where the light enters you. That line is often shared today, sometimes without context, but in his life it was very real. He experienced loss, confusion, and emotional intensity. His words did not come from theory. They came from experience. It's also important to understand that Rumi was a Sufi. Sufism is a mystical branch of Islam that focuses on inner purification and closeness to God. It does not reject religion. Instead, it tries to go deeper into it. For Rumi, faith was not only about rules and structure. It was about direct connection, about feeling something personal and alive. He continued teaching, but his lessons became more poetic. Over time, his spoken verses were collected into major works. One of his most important books is called the Masnavi. It is a long poetic work filled with stories, reflections, and spiritual lessons. Some people even call it one of the most important texts in Sufi literature. The Masnavi is not just abstract poetry. It includes simple stories about everyday people, animals, kings, merchants, and ordinary situations. Through these stories, he explains complex spiritual ideas in a way that feels accessible. He understood that people connect with stories more than with dry explanation. Something else that surprises many people is that Rumi did not sit down and carefully write most of his poems. He would speak them out loud in moments of inspiration. Students and followers wrote them down as he recited them. The poetry flowed naturally in conversation and reflection. The tradition of the whirling dervishes also grew during this period. Rumi sometimes entered a state of deep reflection that involved turning in circles. For him, this movement symbolized the motion of the universe. Just as planets revolve around the sun, the human soul revolves around the divine. After his death, his followers formalized this practice into a spiritual ceremony known as the Sema. Today, when people see the white robes and spinning dancers, they often think of it as performance. But originally, it was a form of meditation and remembrance. Another interesting point is language. Rumi wrote mainly in Persian, even though he lived in what is now Turkey. Persian was the literary language of that region at the time. Over centuries, his work was translated into many languages, which is one reason he became so widely known. In modern times, he has become one of the best-selling poets in the United States. That is remarkable when you consider he lived in the 13th century. His themes of love, loss, growth, and longing feel universal. People going through heartbreak, spiritual questioning, or personal change often find comfort in his words. But sometimes his message is simplified too much. He is often presented only as a gentle poet of positivity. In reality, his writing includes struggle, doubt, and the breaking of pride. His idea of love was intense. It required surrender. It required letting go of control. By this stage of his life, Rumi was no longer just a respected local teacher. He had become a spiritual guide whose influence spread beyond his immediate community. And yet, despite all the recognition, he remained rooted in teaching and community life. As Rumi grew older, his life became quieter on the outside, but deeper on the inside. He continued teaching in Konya. He continued guiding students. His circle of followers grew. but he never turned into a distant public figure. He still lived among people. He still had family responsibilities. He still dealt with normal life. Over time, his works were collected and organized by his students, especially one of his closest companions, Hussam al-Din. Without those students carefully writing down his words, a lot of his poetry might have been lost. That is something people forget. His legacy survived because others valued it enough to preserve it. Rumi passed away in the year 1273 in Konya. What happened at his funeral says a lot about who he was. People from different religious backgrounds attended. Muslims, Christians, and Jews all came to honor him. That was not common at that time. It shows that his message reached beyond one community. Even though he was deeply rooted in Islamic tradition, his words felt universal. His tomb in Konya still stands today. Thousands of visitors travel there every year. Some go for religious reasons. Some go out of curiosity. Some just want to feel connected to the history behind the poetry they've read. 800 years later, his words are still being translated, shared, and quoted all over the world. But here's something I think is important. Rumi did not start out as a poet of love. He started as a disciplined scholar. His transformation happened in the middle of his life. He was almost 40 when he met Shams. That's not young. That's not the beginning of a career. That's a stage when many people think their path is already fixed. And yet, his biggest change happened then. This is the part where his story connects to us. When I look at Rumi's life, what stands out to me is not just the poetry. It's the fact that he allowed himself to change. He didn't protect his old identity just because it was respected. He didn't say, "This is who I am and I can't move from this." He let a new experience reshape him. That's something we can all think about. Sometimes we get comfortable in one version of ourselves. We build a reputation. We build a routine. We think that changing direction means losing stability. But Rumi shows that growth can happen even after you think you've figured life out. He also shows that pain does not automatically destroy you. In his case, loss became creativity. Grief became poetry. The person he loved disappeared, but instead of closing himself off, he opened up even more. If you're watching this and you feel like something in your life has shifted or fallen apart, Rumi's story is a reminder that transformation does not have an age limit. It does not have a deadline. Sometimes, the moment that feels like disruption is actually the beginning of something deeper. That doesn't mean everything will be easy. His life was not simple. He faced criticism. He faced misunderstanding. But he kept moving toward what felt true to him. Rumi's legacy is not just a collection of quotes about love. It is the story of a man who allowed himself to evolve. Today, people read his work during heartbreak, during spiritual searching, during times of confusion. His poetry does not give simple answers. It invites reflection. It invites people to look inward. And maybe that's why he still matters. He lived in the 13th century. He spoke in Persian. He taught in a very different cultural world. Yet somehow his voice still feels close to us. That kind of endurance doesn't happen by accident. It happens when someone speaks about something universal. And that's Rumi. If you enjoyed this kind of deep dive into his life, let me know what you think about his transformation. Do you see him more as a poet, a scholar, or a spiritual teacher? I'd love to hear your perspective.